version has been called Dialogues and Emancipation, and it is done in collaboration with the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso. My name is Catherine Manuel, and I'm going to be the moderator of this session. This is an open, free access symposium through Facebook, and it has 40 sections of 1 hour in English, French, and Spanish, and they will be translated into the 3 languages simultaneously. Please visit our website of the symposium to get more information, and also invite you to attend other sessions. Please send your comments at any time, and please mute your microphones in order to avoid any interruption. Before starting, we will have at the end of the day an open session
que se ha denominado Happy Hour, en la que
called Happy Hour, where you all can attend to see and discuss the sessions of the day in a more relaxed way. Please look for the links for the Happy Hour in the webpage of the symposium. Thank you. I wanted to start this session with a song called Arauco tiene una vena. This section is dedicated to the original native indigenous and to the transforming power.
Tiene una pena que no la puedo callar. Son injusticias de siglo que todos ven aplicar. Nadie le ha puesto remedio, pudiéndolo remediar. Levántate, buen chullar. Un día llega de lejos, Huescufe conquistador, buscando montañas de oro que el indio nunca buscó. Al indio le basta el oro que le relumbra del sol. Levántate, Curimón. Entonces corre la sangre, no sabe el indio qué hacer. Le van a quitar su tierra, la tiene que defender. Levántate, Manquilés. ¿A dónde se fue Lautaro? Perdido en el cielo azul. Y el alma de Galvarino se la llevó el viento sur. Por eso pasan llorando los cueros de su poltrón. Levántate, pues, Calfín. Que el indio afligido está, a la sombra de su ruca lo pueden ver lloriquear. Totoral de 5 siglos nunca se habrá de secar. Levántate, Cayupán. Tiene una pena más negra que su chamal. Ya no son los españoles los que les hacen llorar. Hoy son los propios chilenos los que les quitan su pan. Levántate, Pailagua. Ya rugen la votación, se escuchan por no dejar. Pero el quejido del indio, porque no se escuchará, aunque resuene en la tumba la voz de Caupolicán. de Huenchullar.
Violeta Parra es una cantautora y folclorista chilena que
Violeta
vivió
Parra is a songwriter and folklorist Chilean who lived between 1976 and 1967, which is a reference of the Chilean popular music for the war. This song, Arauco tiene una pena, or Arauco has a lament, was written in 1957. She wrote it after a trip through Europe where it was impregnated with the political and social movement that sought to put end to the social, political, and economic conflict that finished the World War II. The European politicians began the process of building what we know today as the European Union. When she returned to Chile, her purpose was to investigate the music and songs of the native people of this territory, particularly the Mapuche population. At that time, in accordance with several artists, they expressed their interest to the traditional Latin American music called until then folkloric. Those who seek to return the lost step of the original Abdayala, oldest name so far known referring to an American territory, which would literally mean land and in full maturity. Little by little, the songwriter established a contact and built trust with the Mapuche. That wasn't easy because she was a mestizo woman. From this period of research, Violeta incorporated in her music Mapuche musical instruments like as the cultrún, the pifilca, the tutruca, among others, making a break with the music she had performed until then. This theme has an anti-colonial content that made it an emblematic and precursor of the new Latin American song, as stated by Lisel Querosel in his article, Arauco has a lament, the decoloniality sung by Violeta Parra. This new Latin American song as a musical expression was developed in the 60s in several countries of the American country. It was different from the previous musical of the recurrence of the region because it carried a strong dose of criticism and social commitment. At the time, thinkers, intellectuals, and artists became aware of the class and racial inequalities plaguing the region since colonial time. In this specific issue, she denounces the situation of Mapuche population since 1492 with an external criticism. Arauco tiene una pena. I cannot silence it, sings Boleta, but committed at the same time to the decolonial project. Nobody fixed it, being able to fix it, sentences one of her verses. The rhythm of this song is marked by the sound of the cultrum that make us think of a prayer, but also in a song that calls for action and resistance, reinforces by the repetition of wake up in each of the verse. In fact, as Quirosel stated in 2019, points out the musical themes. These musical themes evoke the coloniality of power lived by Mapuches since the 16th century, but also vindicates the genuinely of the anti-colonial heroes of its history, Lautaro, Galvarino, and Caupolicán, as the distinguished protagonists of the resistance to Spanish colonization. Later, in the history of repression of indigenous people, the constitution of the nation stated after that American independence meant a new period of pressure and war against the original population of Abdayala. The political model adopted since then sought the imposition of the unique and dominant culture, in this case, the white mestizo. Finally, the strength and the timeliness of these songs lie in the fact that it is not only a denunciation of historical oppression, but also a visibility of the struggle and political and cultural resistance of the Mapuche people. Probably, as Quirosel points out, due to the lack of bibliographic sources or evolution in the area, Violeta focuses solely on the male war actions. However, today we know and we recognize the main political and military role of the women on the regional people. As Lorena Cabral states, daughter of the cosmogony and co-founder of the community territorial feminist movement in Guatemala, she says that the preponderant role of Mapuche defenders of the territory should be highlighted to the close relationship between bodies and territory. In line with the above, to speak of transformation and education implies considering the educational field as a main place for the critical popular awareness, emancipation, and hope. This breaking of the traditional of reproductive perspective for the education, following Paulo Freire and other authors with the same critical perspective, raise an idea of a reflective transformation and liberating education. Today, our discussions will focus around these issues, the indigenous peoples and transformative education. First, the plenary conference will be developed by Mr. Manuel Muñoz Millalonco, who will talk about the development of interculturality from Wekimün Chilkatuwe, Classroom to Educate in Peace and Human Rights. Then we will have 3 parallel tables in the 3 languages. In Spanish, we will talk about the theme of indigenous education, encounters and disagreements, tensions between autonomy and assimilation, and this conversation will be moderated by Mr. Yamadir Uribe. In French, the panel will address the 1974 recommendation concerning education for international understanding, cooperation, and peace, and education in the field of human rights and fundamental freedoms. This will be moderated by Ms. Cecilia Barbier. In the case of the English Roundtable, the topic will be critical media literacy and environmental justice. That will be moderated by Mr. Jeff Scher. Later in the day, around noon, we will discuss in parallel in 2 tables, one in Spanish and one in English, educational research and intercultural context from decolonizing approach, a round table that will be moderated by Catherine Arias, and visual literacy as social action, praxis of photography for social change, moderated by Miranda Maki. After lunch, we will start the afternoon also in parallel with 2 roundtables in Spanish and English. In Spanish roundtable, we will talk about the table transformative education and indigenous peoples for a global citizenship in a local perspective. This will be moderated by Mr. Winston Triqueo. And in the English roundtable, we will discuss about arts and indigeneity as catalyst for radical hope and alternative future, moderated by Dalen Swanson. Then we will reflect on decolonizing schooling in an indigenous context, a round table that will be moderated by Mr. Segundo Quintriqueo. While in the French roundtable, we will discuss about innovative pedagogical approach rooted in indigenous realities, knowledge, and territories. They are moderated by Denis Belamer. Finally, to close the day, we will have a happy hour where we can establish dialogues in a spontaneous way, allowing participants to discuss these issues and maybe establish some research network. Before starting this journey, I welcome you and invite you with this picture designed by one of our students. And so I invite you to deconstruct the margins and structures and believe that transformative education can cover and flood our territories. So now I leave you with Mr. Manuel Muñoz Millalonco, who will do the plenary conference, who is Mapuche Huiliche anthropologist, an academic from the Chiloé archipelago in Chile. He's recognized for his work on issues related to indigenous territory in Chiloé, his participation within the General Council of Caciques of Chiloé, and in the Cumen Mongen Rupo Health Program. He did a master's degree in rural social development at the Universidad Austral de Chile, and his thesis, The Village Intercultural Health Model and its Effect on the Management management of public primary health in the commune of Caleon, Chile, has been described as a systematization for the university field of intercultural health experience in the Chiloé territory. Today, he will share with us his presentation called Development of Interculturality from Wekimün Chilkatuwe, Classroom to Educate in Peace and Human Rights. We give you the floor, Mr. Manuel.
Saltomai lamien. Mari kompuche. Inche Manuel Muñoz Millalonco pingen. Asumche fenyen ka directonyen. Ti Wekimün Chilkatuwe. Fashante inche kuifunken ka kumelen welu tani lonkoniemi ka piukeniemi. Asumchefe Jessica Cabrera. Fei Wenumapu Amutui ni Puyutla. Buenos días a todas y todos.
Good morning to all of you. As I have just said in our original language, my name is Manuel Millalonco. I am professor and academic director of Wekimün Chilkatuwe, an intercultural school of arts and jobs located in Natribajo, the municipality of Chonchi and the province archipelago of Chiloé. Today, I'm very happy, but I have in my mind and in my heart, Miss the teacher of Wekimün Chilkatuwe, Jessica Cabrera, who the day before yesterday went to the Wenumapu. She passed away, but she will continue to be the light in Wekimün. And today I want to dedicate this presentation to your memory in the name of the whole community of Wekimün Chilkatuwe. I'm going to share a presentation right now.
¿Se ve bien? ¿Sí? Catherine, si pudieras indicarme si se ve la presentación.
Can you see me well?
Carpeta donde la estabas abriendo.
No, we can only see the folder where you're opening it up.
Tienes que dejar de compartir y compartir directamente la presentación, Manuel.
You have to stop sharing your screen and share the slide. Show directly.
Ahí.
Can you see it now?
Ahí sí. Perfecto.
Bueno, pues un poco como dice en el resumen.
How, like the summary says, the goal of this presentation is to share the process of the community of Chiloé and the processes that we've been carrying out with our young people. This journey has been with the solidarity of people who were moved by respect for our Mother Earth. I am Mapuche, but my understanding of the historic process was part of our educational process in school. It wasn't a part of our education in school or in our families. We learned a story from the past of what we were. In our families, we learned about the cycles of nature, medical knowledge, and defense before the discrimination that we lived in the 20th century in Chiloé and in Chile. This strengthened our conception of humanity and the rights that should be respected as people. Chilean schools never mentioned the word indigenous in reference to real knowledge. They never used indigenous culture as part of the vocabulary of the teachers. At no level, the most that might happen is that an indigenous person or a person with an indigenous last name could defend a child that was named Indian. We never even knew the early history of indigenous people. Our original tongue was in our last names, in our myths, in the names of the geographic areas around us, words that could not be silenced in their sounds, but that had been resignified by the majority. In what was indigenous was voices, words that in Chiloé were transformed into something mestizo, something mixed. Those of us who thankfully now have indigenous last names were discriminated by white people. And as children, we had the intuition that something had been done against us. Our elders didn't change their last names, their indigenous last names, as many did, to overcome discrimination. And this was inherited by other generations as an undervaluing of our own culture. We wanted to create a different story. And this was born in our going through the anthropological school and education. The way of bringing up children, the economy, the culture was a mirror for indigenous people. With theoretical ideas, we encountered the conceptualization of culture. And those concepts invited us to see the horizon of our own culture and invited us to think of our own culture above and beyond the ethnocentric prejudices that we had learned in school. Our first encounter with the children of the Mapuches in Chiloé showed us the historic injustice. Indigenous lands which had been granted during the Spanish colonialization had been taken systematically by the Chilean state, starting in the 1900s. There was a large number of lands that had been stolen, and this showed the injustice that remained. We found out about the promises that had not been kept, the attacks of company owners, and the way in which people who were interested in folklore took photos and left them with the families of the communities. We got to know a history which was very close but also unknown. This history of our young people, of our family members who were sensitive to injustice and that had gone through so many injustices during the dictatorship. We wanted to get to know and defend our method and our methodology to go over archives was questions. We talked with other students of anthropology and law, and we talked about witnesses and archaeological sites and empiric evidence to show what was evident. This led to law theses and anthropological theses. And in '93, we became part of a commission to study the indigenous territories of Chiloé. And there was a process, and we became young experts in something that many people were not interested in. We learned a lot about the territorial history of the indigenous people, the injustices, and the methodology gave us guidance about how to create territorial maps, how to recover titles for lands, how company owners became owners of land, indigenous land. There was little information about this in books. Why we had to do this came early on from conversations with elders. The defense of the land was a defense of Mother Earth, of Mapunuke. And those who defended the land, even those who joined the defense late, were the daughters and sons of the land. There was an emotional and motherly relationship. While there was life, while there is still a world. This conception of the defense of the land of Mapunuke was evident when, after we made these claims, the state imposed individual land titles over collective land titles. And the land was transformed in private property rather than the Mother Earth, which was used to produce products that were then alienated and sold. This had occurred during the dictatorship already in Chiloé. The dialogue about justice derived in fragmentation of the community, and those divisions in the community was the way to stop us from being what we were and what we still are. It was not just about defending the territory, but understanding those who weren't understanding those who did not understand the conception of the Mother Earth, the Mapunuke. In the life of Mapunuke is our life, and in her death is our death. Our health is under our feet in medicinal plants, and the Mapunuke, we came to know that all people, all plants, all animals are necessary for Mapuñuque. That for Mapuñuque, there are trees that are better than others, plants that are better than others, or fish that are better than others. When humans think that there are trees or plants or fish that are better than others, he can also think that there are humans that are better than others. And those others should disappear so that those that are better can live. Those conversations allowed us to understand the Mapuche-Huilliche connection in Chiloé. It's the conversation of our parents, of our grandparents, and their proposals which have been transmitted to remain in the land and with the water, to respect the water as a way of maintaining life, that it is the Mother Earth that sustains us. Those of us that live on Mother Earth are Shauku, water that is pulled together. That word that was demonized by Chilean schools, which is taught still as the demon that lives in the forests of Chiloé. In 95, the indigenous organization was consulted about the execution of a study about biological miscegenation that was going to be carried out in the indigenous communities. The National Corporation for Indigenous Development and the Temuco Investigation Center proposed a study about the human genome. That same year, the organization found out that in Quillón, in 85, the population, the blood samples had been taken from the population, and this was used to isolate aspects of the indigenous genetic material to combat a virus. This information was added to the fact that there was 27 requests for patents on human genetic material. So we criticized this and put a complaint about this because there was a lack of consent and other violations. And this led to an agreement with the health authorities. And we created a project to know about the diversity of the community in Chiloé. From the beginning, the conversation showed that there was indigenous knowledge about health and healthcare. The conceptions of the professionals in healthcare, there was a crisis in the conversation, but the political moments demanded an openness towards indigenous communities, and this became an opportunity to share the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge about healthcare. At the beginning, we tried to raise awareness about the knowledge and the beliefs and the resistance of the communities. The value placed on the health knowledge of indigenous communities led to creating medicines to respond to sicknesses. And there were experiences that connected the official healthcare with indigenous healthcare. And this gave way to an intercultural healthcare system that created a dialogue of knowledge that went from doubts and about our healthcare to doubts about a system that creates more sicknesses for people. In 2005, with the support of the communities of Canada, we created a project which is still part of the network of healthcare in Mapuche, which trains professionals in healthcare and the users of the center in Mapuche healthcare to give back the autonomy of caring for their community and gives the healthcare professionals a way of rethinking their ideas about healthcare. This was guided and inspired by the Mielupu project. People who work in cooperation and in the government created a project known as Wekimün in 2013 in cooperation with the people of the Prince Edward Island. This was oriented by the Professor K, and they created the goal of creating an educational, a school, an intercultural school dedicated to the indigenous communities and dedicated to improving the livelihood and the living conditions, responding to the loss of identity in lands, and questioning the cultural pertinence of educational models. The concept of Wekimün, which means new knowledge, was the inspiration for the project. Wekimün, or new knowledge, is produced when there is a conversation between two people. It comes from a horizontal conversation between two people who share lived experience. It comes from the direct knowledge with Wapunuke, the Mother Earth, where humans dialogue with a horizontal construction within communities. Wekimün comes when there's a society that's trying to create solutions for crisis. We're trying to reconstruct and value the indigenous knowledge and stop seeing it as folklore. It reconstructs the legitimacy and it helps to overcome conflicts and especially allows us to control natural resources. Wekimün allows us to know a universe of indigenous knowledge that has been undervalued.
subordinados y proscritos. Wekimün abre paso y espacio, discrimina positivamente en favor de la cultura subordinada. Su compromiso es con la
Its
libertad.
commitment is with the freedom. It requires justice actions as methodological actions. It requires great commitments. Interculturality that comes from Wekimün is referred to the people and to the knowledge systems that appears as a product of the development, cultural development of the indigenous people, and give power to the strength of the identity. The project makes this indigenous process through the dialogue between knowledge system, the traditional knowledge of the indigenous people and the scientific knowledge to think on their own culture, to open the memory, the remembers, and make awareness of the dichotomical progress of conservation, destruction, remember, forgetting, toward conservation and updating of the resources as a dynamic and an harmonic fusion. The initiative appears in the context of the crisis of the salmon industry in the Chiloé province and the coming back of the young people to their territories with no tool that will allow them to raise their family and live in a traditional family, finding as the only source of work the collection of algae during the small period of time during the summer, or going to the big Chiloé island looking for an urban job. At the beginning of the project, of the Wekimün project, we collect information on the situation of the young people in the territory. This need diagnosis, together with ratifying the situation of the indigenous young people, reflect the desires and hopes of the children, of the young people to live in their territory, and the awareness they had regarding the impact of the salmon industry, as well as the educational model when it reached the remote areas that has led the young people to leave their families and communities because the school didn't offer but the first basic school years. And just recently has included the basic complete education. The young people that stay in their territory and those that would like to come back to their territories state that the lack of opportunities, including the not knowledge of the cultures, is because the migratory process was highlighted by the discrimination to the indigenous people or in the cities and in the schools. And it has really strongly impact their entity and their link with the knowledge of the older people and with the previous generations. The original language has just kept in the last names and in the toponymy. It has no link with, they have no link with indigenous medicine, with the technology, with the production system, fishing, navigation, conservation of food, construction. Those that live in the forestry just see the trees as sources incomes, but the knowledge related to the ecosystem has not been included or assumed by them. On the other side, the same young people they express their desire to meet and accept the previous generation and to establish the link with the knowledge system. One still in the life of the family and others just in the memory. So based on all this previous background that I have just expressed, the interdisciplinary team and intercultural team of Wekimün designed a academic curriculum generating two programs, one for bilingual intercultural education and sustainable development, and the other, well, one of education and the other health. And both include the sustainable development. Both programs were given forming Pu Adunchefe, that's educational agents, and Pula Wentuchefe, that's complementary therapeuticals of the indigenous medicine, that together with the original language and with the Huiliche medical system were prepared as promoters and facilitators of the sustainable development to respond actively to the needs of the community relating the modern and the ancient knowledge. The methodological proposal of the school was based basically on the health program Huilichuku Mugenrupu, and was complemented by learning methodology based on projects. This strength, the capacity to flexible exercise the process of autonomy based on its own conception as a relational model from their own cosmovision to face the territory reality and community reality. On the other side, learning and teaching spaces were generated in 30 hectares area that has the same features of the lands where the students come from. These areas or site rooms are the medicinal path of the forestry, the green garden, the Conchalo archaeological remain, the area for raising chickens, the chafun on main fire, the kitchen, and the healthcare spaces. In each of these spaces, the students learn and teach, share their knowledge, supported by the traditional teachers, Adunchefe, and also supported by university formation. The initial objective of Wekimün project was concrete in 2027 through the Intercultural School of Art and Jobs that is today registered in the National Service of Training and Job. The current Chilean law obliges us to adapt the design curriculum to the sense requirements, dividing it in 5 courses that share the areas with the formation of different jobs: language and cultural of Mapuche Huiliche, indigenous medicine therapies, sustainable production, gastronomy, and intercultural tourism. Associated to the management of this program, Wekimün keeps academic links with the Public University of Playa Ancha, Valparaíso, strengthening and keeping as part of its research the exchange of knowledge from the Wekimün Interculturality. Why Wekimün Chilkatuwe has consequence on promoting the human rights and building of the peace. From the point of view of the protecting regulation of the human rights, Wekimün Chilkatuwe represent a collective of an active exercise of the right to autonomy and the education of the Mapuche population of Chiloé in the terms of these rights that are in the international legal bodies of indigenous people rights, and especially in the Agreement 169 and the United Nations Declaration of the Indigenous People Rights. The Agreement 169 is supported in 2 main foundations: that the right of every indigenous people to keep and strengthen the cultures and ways of life and own institution, and the right to participate actively in the decision making. In the education space, this agreement consagrates the right of the indigenous people to acquire education at all of the levels, at least and at the same level with the rest of the national community, and have access to a proper education meeting their collective needs. Considering the existence of these international regulations in force in Chile, as well as all the others report of the human rights, the Wekimün Chilkatuwe action meets the collective needs because it formalized the delivery of the indigenous knowledge with the methodologies developed in these academic spaces. This knowledge in front of the negations reestablish the dignity of the people participating in this learning and teaching process, because each Chilkatuwe student is aware of the origin and development of this knowledge and can share it. That will be Wekimün for others and others, with which he will share his knowledge for people, indigenous and non-indigenous people too. On the other side, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights of the Indigenous People recognize the rights of the indigenous people to establish and control its systems and schools, providing education in their own language and according to the learning and teaching cultural methods. And in addition, the state shall adopt efficient measures together with indigenous people. So in order to, especially the children, including those not living within the community, have access whenever possible to the education in its own culture and and in their own language. So more than words, Wekimün Chilkatuwe, the teachers, is and shall be intercultural teaching. Each Achunchefe shall need, understand, and develop the indigenous knowledge. Many times he needs to forget what he knows, they know, and then assume and have this positive action to the indigenous. It's a different reflection that produce a synthesis that can share within the academic community and that can generate new reflection and expand the democracy of the knowledge in an intercultural perspective, knowledge of the historical differences. In this level, the respect to the human rights, to know, to understand their own knowledge, considering the evaluation and validation of indigenous knowledge about life. These decrease violence and the structural racism, and with that, generating collective and individual peace. Why do we state what we have just explained? Because violence toward our people in the schools, it's evident, not because we appear as just those that wear, but because the text and the wording about us are overloaded of discrimination. We were taught, and we are taught, we were taught and are taught at the schools and the university, the folkloric practice. There is this wording, official text, research on the San Juan party, but there is no official text for the whole Chilean school community that talks about Huechipantu, the new renewal party, the new year that we celebrate to celebrate the life of the Mapuñunque, of the Mother Earth. This fact denied in the school prevent the children, the boys and girls of indigenous and non-indigenous boys and girls learned about the winter solstice and how our people early observe this phenomenon and express their love and respect to the Mother Earth. The knowledge that comes through the educational process are good news and bad news on the humanity, findings, events, achievements along the history, European history that we learn, their findings, their wars, their progress does not leave space to the indigenous knowledge. And when there is a small space to talk about the local culture, we talk about the folklore. We receive notice from the Trauco and the description as a monster, the predator of the forestry. And Trauco becomes Shauco in the indigenous wording. And it's a concept that means that all of us are water together, as well as the plants, the trees, the fishes. And we also shall say that this is a millennial knowledge of the Mapuche Huilliche population. That was maybe also a knowledge of the Monteverde inhabitants that leave cultural remains of about 4,500 years before. So the students, professor, and in general, they receive with this happily this news. But there is another wording, the coherence between the Madopun work with the indigenous conception. It's not an empty knowledge, neither critical knowledge. It's not to compare the non-understanding of the dominators on such an important concept, but we stop talking about further to progress and develop more the modern water theory and how we say that we are more than 75% of water as stated by Cavendish in 1781. But this connection with the water composition was early discovered by our own people very early. Exercise as the one described replace the human rights on our knowledge. It harmonized the relations among different and reestablish the dignity among those which are part of the history not told. One person start to acquire knowledge, start to evaluate the indigenous knowledge, the culture, the indigenous people, and also has explicit reasons to observe and be with the nature in a very friendly way. The behaviors are modified and the categories to evaluate the personal life and others' life too. There are several examples like the millenary system of food conservation, Curantun, and the consequences are as important as beautiful. That's why it's very important, this relation between human rights and building of peace in the schools and with the surrounding, because this allowed our students to move on safety and feeling sure what they know and that they can share with the others. Well, what are the reasons we are learning? This is just we're coming to the conclusion. These are the lessons that we want to share. They are all very important. We have been able to progress in the relations in the horizontal dialogue. We have also worked with this horizontal dialogue that has been the support of the knowledge and this coherence between the indigenous knowledge, the proper use of the legal institutionality and the appropriation of the interculturality definition, placing them in the knowledge spaces, requesting the conceptual reflection as well as the verification of the asymmetry and the overcome of them. In front of this, then our organization has generated a process of recovery, diffusion, and update of the cultural resources for a better exercise, more autonomy, and aware to conserve and develop this knowledge within and outside the community. The current legal institutionality with its own scope and limitation, our organization, together with claiming for rights, affirm the rights in order to develop and promote the development of the Mapuche Huiliche people, expanding the autonomy as our current institution. The interculturality as definition that comes from the state and the academia has been collected by the traditional institution and has developed with a synergy relation from the knowledge where the understanding and the practice of this leads to horizontal agreements that generate mutual knowledge building and an excellent intercultural relation, producing Wekimün that are the owners of the academic community members. So this paradigm of the interculturality in Wekimün allows the reality to be reflected from the cultural diversity where the indigenous is a space of keeping knowledge system open to constant process of updating of the cultural resources, even though when such process is subject to the pressures of the hegemonic model. With the inclusion of the indigenous as an expression of a cosmovision supported in the deep relation with the ecosystem, the territory has a new dimension. It's not anymore this of subestimated space, but it becomes a space with a rich cultural offer with discrete and conceptual resources to face the relation of all of the people. This relation and this dialogue between the indigenous and from its organization and from its knowledge system becomes some formative and transforming space for the community, forming because it provides the reflection to review and assess the role of the community people and their space in the community, and transform because it replaces and return value to the indigenous knowledge as a space to build the community and the policy, giving democracy to the knowledge, especially their own knowledge, and putting the scientific knowledge, recovering the methodology, the perspective, and the ways of life. And finally, we shall say that Wekimün Chilkatuwe is the product, the outcome of different alliances, international and intercultural alliance between indigenous and non-indigenous institutions, between the academic knowledge and the traditional knowledge, between the cultures, between a red that keeps extending through the continent, that has go from the north to the south pole to promote educational process in the indigenous territory of our people of Chiloé. This alliance that will generate new conversation will continue to generate Wekimün. Chaltumay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. I thank you greatly for your words. Of this transformation between those who live and those who come to something from the academy. Wekimün is an experience of respect for territories and ancestral knowledge. Thank you so much for your words and your presentation. Thank you for participating in this plenary session. We invite you to continue to participate in the other activities of this day, which will be with the topic that that professor presented. Have a great day. Goodbye.